I was looking at my bookshelf this morning and I had a bit of a crisis. I've got all the metaphysical classics, the modern commentaries, notebooks just full of highlighted passages. I know the theory. If you quizzed me on the principles, I'd pass with flying colors.
What?
But, well, if I'm being brutally honest, there are days where my actual life doesn't feel like it matches the books. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I know the truth intellectually, but I'm still stressing about bills or getting annoyed in traffic or, feeling insecure. It's like there's this wall between what I know in my head and what I'm actually living.
That gap is exactly what we're tackling today.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's the most common frustration for anyone on this path.
Oh, good. So it's not just me.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's the difference between memorizing a map of the territory
Mhm.
and actually hiking the trail. You can know the elevation of the mountain, but that doesn't mean your legs aren't going to burn when you climb it.
Exactly. And that is why we are doing this deep dive. We're revisiting a classic that I know a lot of our listeners have on their shelves right now, Emilie Cady's Lessons in Truth.
And we're really focusing in on Chapter 8, Spiritual Understanding.
Yeah, which is arguably the pivot point of the whole book.
It really is.
And for those who might be new to this, or maybe just haven't dusted off their copy in a while, Emilie Cady, that's pronounced K-E-D, she was this incredible homeopathic physician writing in the late 19th century, part scientist, part mystic.
A fascinating combination.
But we're not just looking at the vintage text today. We're also layering in some really practical commentary from Reverend Gaylon McDowell's program, Truth Transformed.
Which is great because McDowell really helps bridge that 1890s language into our 2024 reality.
So the mission today is simple but huge. How do we close that gap? How do we move from what Cady calls intellectual lore to an actual spiritual birth?
How do we stop just reading about the power and actually start using it?
Yes.
Well, to do that, we have to start by defining the problem. Because Cady suggests that our studying might actually be getting in the way.
Which is so counterintuitive. Usually when I'm stuck, my instinct is to buy another book or sign up for another workshop.
Right. But Cady draws a very sharp, I'd say aggressive line between intellectual perception and true spiritual understanding.
Okay.
She uses the analogy of science. She says you can study geology, the science of rocks. You can know the chemical composition of granite, understand how heat and pressure formed it. You can label it perfectly in a museum.
But knowing the label doesn't mean you understand the essence of the rock.
Exactly. It's all external data. You have intellectual lore about the rock. Cady says we do the exact same thing with God. We study theology. We memorize the attributes of the divine. We learn the metaphysics of how prayer works.
But it's just data.
It's just data acquisition. It's not the thing itself.
It's like reading the menu and thinking you've eaten dinner.
That's it. That's a perfect analogy. You can starve to death reading a menu. Cady defines true spiritual understanding as a revelation of God within the heart. It is a spiritual birth.
Oh, birth.
It's not something you deduce, it's something that happens to you. Reverend McDowell pulls a fantastic quote from Eric Butterworth to describe the state most of us are in. He says many students are overread and underdone.
Overread and underdone. Wow, that stings a little.
It does.
It sounds like a bad stick, but I know exactly what he means. We have all the ingredients, but we haven't actually cooked the meal.
We've heard the CDs, attended the lectures, highlighted the books, but there is a lack of demonstration. And this leads Cady to critique something she calls mind cure. Now, this often confuses people because we talk about the power of the mind all the time.
Right. Affirmations are a huge part of this tradition. Is she saying we shouldn't use our minds?
She's making a really nuanced distinction when she talks about mind cure in this chapter. She's talking about trying to force a result through mental willpower alone. She compares it to hypnotism.
Hypnotism. That seems like a really strong word.
Well, think about it. If you are sick or broke and you just grit your teeth and mentally repeat, I am rich, I am rich, I am rich, over and over again, trying to convince your brain of something you don't believe, what are you doing?
Trying to override my reality. I'm trying to, program myself.
You're operating entirely on the intellectual, mental plane. It's an external fix. It's a Band-Aid. Cady says this might give you temporary relief, just like hypnotism can numb pain, but it doesn't heal the source.
Because it's not spiritual understanding.
Exactly. So if mind cure is just pasting a positive thought over a negative belief, the alternative is that true understanding accesses a spring within your own being.
Okay, a spring.
It's not a sticker you apply from the outside. It's a well that leaps up from the inside. It doesn't take effort in the same way. It flows.
And there's a specific story from the Bible that both Cady and McDowell use to illustrate this shift. It's the Peter principle, basically.
Yes, that moment in Matthew where Jesus quizzes the disciples. He asks, "Who do you say that I am?"
And the crowd and even some of the disciples, they give all the book smart answers.
Right. They say, "You're Elijah. You're Jeremiah. You're one of the prophets."
Yeah.
They're doing exactly what we just talked about. They're categorizing him based on past data. They're using their intellect to label him.
But Peter goes off script.
Peter says, "You are the Christ."
Yeah.
And Jesus' response is the critical part. He doesn't say, "Good job, Peter. You studied the prophecies correctly."
No.
He says, "Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you."
Flesh and blood being a metaphor for the intellect, the brain.
The intellect, the five senses, the logical brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jesus is saying, "You didn't figure this out, Peter. It was revealed to you by the Father." It was a download,
Yeah.
a flash of intuition.
It wasn't a deduction, it was a realization.
Exactly.
You know, that distinction between figuring it out and having it reveal is terrifying for a control freak like me.
Mhm.
Because I can control my study habits. I can control how many books I read, but I can't control a revelation.
And that desire to control it, to possess it like a commodity, that's exactly the trap Cady warns about next. She brings up the story of Simon Magus,
The magician.
the magician. In the book of Acts, Simon sees the apostles performing real miracles healing, channeling the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And he's a guy who knows tricks, but he realizes, wait, this isn't a trick. This is real power. So what does he do?
He pulls out his wallet.
He literally offers them money. He says, "Sell me this power." He treats it like a franchise fee. He wants to buy the license to the Holy Spirit.
And Peter just shuts him down immediately. Your money perish with you.
It's a harsh rebuke, but the lesson's vital. You cannot buy a spiritual birth. You can't purchase understanding.
Yeah.
It's a gift of the Spirit, not a product of the marketplace.
Okay, but let's bring this down to earth. I don't think any of our listeners are out there trying to bribe a priest for miracles. But we do try to buy this in other ways, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. We try to buy it through proximity. Reverend McDowell calls this the guru trap. You go to a retreat where you sit in the front row at a lecture by a powerful teacher, someone who has done the work, and you feel this amazing energy coming off them. You feel high on life.
I have definitely been there. You leave the conference center feeling like you're floating, like you're finally fixed.
And then what happens 3 days later?
The laundry piles up, the emails come flooding in, and the feeling just evaporates.
Because you were warming your hands at their fire.
Yeah.
You were basking in their light. You didn't ignite your own. McDowell explains that while a teacher can give you a boost, it's temporary. He says there is no such thing as undemonstrated understanding.
Wow.
If you can't demonstrate it in your own life by yourself on a Tuesday morning, you don't really possess it.
There's a story McDowell shares from a caller, I think it was Reverend Bobby, that was just beautiful because it describes the moment where this actually shifts from borrowed light to own light.
Yes, Bobby spoke about a friend of his, and she was someone who knew all the definitions. She was overread, as we said.
Right.
But she was in prayer one day, not asking for anything, just being present. And she had an experience she described as touching the hem of the garment.
That's a reference to the woman in the Gospels who touched Jesus's robe and was healed instantly.
Exactly. It was a tactile, visceral experience of the divine presence. And she said that in that split second, everything changed. It moved from a theology in her head to a reality in her heart.
She experienced God.
Once she experienced it, the doubts vanished. You can't unknow an experience like that.
That's the spiritual birth Cady is talking about.
That's it. And Cady is very humble here. She says right to the reader, "I cannot reveal God to you. No book can. The book is just a finger pointing at the moon. Don't stare at the finger. Look where it's pointing."
So we've established what it isn't. It's not book learning. It's not mental affirmation. It's not something you can buy or borrow. So the million-dollar question is, how do we invite this revelation? Because Cady and McDowell do lay out a specific protocol.
They do. And it starts with the order of operations. We have to look at the story of Solomon.
King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, or so the legend goes.
Right. Now, in the story, God appears to Solomon in a dream and basically hands him a blank check. Ask what I shall give thee. Now, just pause and think about the human temptation there.
Oh, it's massive. If the universe said, I'll give you anything, my ego is immediately asking for the lottery win, perfect health, maybe a little fame, and for my annoying neighbor to move away.
Exactly. Riches, long life, power over enemies. That is what the natural man wants. But Solomon doesn't ask for any of that.
No.
He asks for an understanding heart. He wants the internal capacity to discern truth.
And because he put that first.
He got the rest as a bonus. The text says because he didn't ask for riches, God gave him riches and honor on a scale nobody else had ever seen.
This brings us to that spiritual paradox that drives people crazy. To get the stuff, the health, the money, the peace, you have to stop chasing the stuff.
You have to seek the consciousness of the stuff. Cady quotes the famous line, "Seek ye first the kingdom, and all these things shall be added." The mistake we make is we're playing a game of Twister. We try to put one hand on health, one foot on money, one hand on relationships, and we just get tied in knots.
Because we're chasing the added things instead of the kingdom.
Right. If you get the kingdom, that spiritual understanding, the things follow automatically because they are just the shadow cast by your consciousness.
But practically speaking, how do we seek first? I mean, we all have busy lives. Reverend McDowell has a tip here that I actually started using, and it's hilariously simple.
It is, he says. Put seek ye first on your actual calendar.
Like literally block out time for it.
Literally. We schedule dentist appointments, we schedule gym time, we schedule Zoom calls. If you treat your spiritual practice as something you do when you have time, you will never have time. You have to make an appointment with the kingdom, treat it as non-negotiable.
So we're prioritizing the time, we're seeking the understanding first, but then Cady throws a curveball in Chapter 8 that I think is really important for the overread crowd. She suggests that too much spiritual seeking can actually be a bad thing.
She calls it spiritual selfishness.
Which sounds like a total contradiction. How can seeking God be selfish? I thought that was the whole point of our existence.
It becomes selfish when it turns into perpetual navel-gazing. If you are constantly looking inward, analyzing your own state, reading more books to make yourself feel more enlightened, you stock the flow. She uses the analogy of a pool of water.
The inlet and the outlet.
Right? Think about a garden pool. To keep the water sweet and clear, fresh water has to flow in, but it must also flow out. If you plug the outlet because you want to hoard all the water, what happens?
It stagnates, it gets green, algae grows, it becomes toxic.
Exactly. Cady's saying that spiritual stagnation happens when we just consume truth without using it. If you're just reading and meditating to make yourself feel high, you've plugged the outlet. You become a spiritual swamp.
This explains why sometimes when I'm in a rut, meditating more actually makes me feel worse. I'm just churning the same stagnant water.
You are. So the solution isn't to take in more. It's to let something out. Cady says, begin with the words of truth that you have learned. Take the very first light you receive and use it.
Use it. That's the command.
Don't wait until you're fully enlightened. Don't wait until you're a master. Use the little flashlight you have right now. Go help someone.
And there's that reference to Isaiah she uses. Deal thy bread to the hungry, then shall thy light break forth as the morning.
That is the Isaiah prescription. And notice the cause and effect there. If you want your light to break forth, if you want that flash of the Most High we talked about, you have to satisfy the afflicted soul. You have to serve. It's the outlet that unclogs the inlet.
That is actually a huge relief. Because I think a lot of us feel like we have to be perfect before we can be useful. We think, who am I to help? I'm still a mess.
Cady just destroys that excuse. She says you are just as necessary to God's plan as the most brilliant intellect or the most cultured person in the world. If you were waiting to be ready, you're actually delaying the flow of God through you.
You're the bottleneck.
You are the bottleneck. You don't get the forest fire of understanding without striking the first match. Service is the match.
So let's paint a picture for the listener. When this actually clicks, when you move from overread to spiritually understanding and you start serving, what does that look like? How does that person walk through the world? Is it just like constant bliss and levitating?
No, it's something much more grounded than that. It's stability. Cady describes a person who no longer talks with an eye to other people's opinions.
Oh, that's a big one. The need for external validation just evaporates.
It does. She says they cease to desire admiration. In fact, compliments start to sound like a clanging cymbal or a noisy gong. They just don't resonate because you're attuned to something deeper. You become plain and true. You aren't performing anymore.
Reverend McDowell shared an incredibly personal story about this in the commentary about his mother's transition service.
That was a very moving moment. He spoke about officiating his own mother's funeral. Now, typically, that is a moment of absolute devastation. It's a moment where the human self usually falls apart, and understandably so.
Right, you'd expect the grief to just overwhelm everything.
But he said he was carried by a spiritual understanding that God is life and God is peace. He wasn't just reciting verses he'd read in a book about comfort. He wasn't giving a speech.
He was living the truth in real time.
He was in a space where he knew it. He said the understanding carried him through. He couldn't even tell you exactly what he said during the service, but he knew he was in a space of absolute peace. That is what spiritual understanding looks like in the trenches. It's not just feeling good when things are easy. It's an unshakable stability when things are hard.
And I think it's so important to emphasize what McDowell says about the timeline here. This doesn't happen all at once.
No, and that's where we need to have patience with ourselves.
Yeah.
It starts as a match, as you said, and becomes a forest fire. Doubts will come up. That's normal. But using that first light faithfully causes it to expand. You don't have to be Jesus on day one. You just have to be faithful with the light you have today.
I think that's the key takeaway here. We're so obsessed with the finish line. I want to be enlightened. I want to be a master. That we forget the method is just using what we have right now.
Exactly. Spiritual understanding isn't a trophy you put on a shelf. It's a muscle you build by lifting the weight of daily life with love and service.
So let's recap the battle plan for everyone listening, because we covered a lot of ground. First, we are acknowledging that we are done being overread and underdone. We aren't going to mistake memorizing the menu for eating the meal.
Right, we're putting the books down for a second and looking inward.
Second, we're recognizing we can't buy this and we can't borrow it. Being around spiritual people isn't enough. We have to do the work ourselves.
No shortcuts, no simony, as Cady would say.
Third, we're prioritizing the kingdom. We're putting it on the calendar. But, and this is the big one, we are unclogging the pool.
We are serving. We are taking the focus off of my enlightenment and asking, how can I help? And paradoxically, that is how the enlightenment comes, by giving it away.
It's a powerful shift. Cady leaves us with this idea that God is essentially waiting on us to open the channel.
It's true. If you're waiting for a lightning bolt, stop waiting. Go help someone. Go deal your bread to the hungry. That is how you flip the switch.
Which raises the final question for you, the listener. Are you the bottleneck in your own spiritual breakthrough? Are you hoarding the light you have, waiting for more, instead of using what you've got?
Question well worth sitting with.
Definitely. Stop trying to get understanding and start living the truth you already know. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
It's been a pleasure.